Greetings, warriors of the Force, and welcome back to our archives. When wielding a lightsaber, a Jedi or Sith would simply not be as effective without the various forms of lightsaber combat. Despite appearances, these aren't mere swords, so adjustments to Force users' martial arts had to change in order to accommodate this strange weapon. We have talked about the various forms of lightsaber combat at length before in our archives, describing the effectiveness and deadliness of each of them as related to those who wielded them. However, there is one that we have yet to give our proper dues to. Going back all the way to the basics, we have the humble Form 1 Shi-Cho. This form is often cast aside as outdated, and often only used to train younglings in rudimentary ways of lightsaber combat and sequences. However, appearances can be deceiving, and the rare few masters of this form are some of the most deadly combatants that the Jedi or Sith have ever seen. In fact, Form 1 is so erratic in its mastered stage that there becomes a genuine danger of being pulled towards the dark side. In this holocron, we are going to venture into the very first form of lightsaber combat to take a full analysis as to why it is quite possibly one of the most deceptively dangerous combat forms for a Jedi to use, and why the Jedi Council and Obi-Wan Kenobi may have feared it and respected it to some extent. Shi-Cho was developed way back in the earliest days of the Jedi, when they made the transition from metal swords to the first lightsabers, then called proto-sabers. These archaic weapons had external power packs that hooked onto the belt of the user and connected to the lightsaber via a cable. Once the Jedi made the full transition over to this new weapon to represent their order, they realized that they simply could not use their staples in the way that they did their force-imbued metal swords. So they developed the first form of lightsaber combat, calling it Shi-Cho. Shi-Cho emphasizes arcing, deliberate strikes directly at the 8 points of combat, and the form was perfectly suited for those just getting started and getting used to wielding their lightsabers. Form 1 was a very forgiving style, providing users with a large margin for error and much room for recovery. The wide sweeping motions of the blade work made it very easy for users to know exactly where their blade is and where it is going to end up. Form 1 eschews many of the fancy flourishes and movements seen in the later styles, opting to focus entirely on deliberate action. It is known among the Order, even in modern times, as the ideal form to fall back on when all other lightsaber forms have failed against an opponent. It encompasses the very nature of how a Jedi should conduct themselves: purposeful but merciful, direct but compassionate. We say this because in many cases, Form 1 sequences result in the disarming of one's opponent. The favored marks of contact for Shi-Cho is Sun Gem, which is the action of cutting directly through the opponent's weapon, and Cho Mai, the action of severing the opponent's hand or their wrist. One of the many strengths of Shi-Cho is that it is excellent in fending off multiple attackers. The sweeping blade work and wide body blocks allow for a user to cleave through and protect from many weapons and opponents in just a few motions of their blade. In the very beginnings, Form 1 was used as more of a crowd control method. Perfect for ancient warfare when on the battlefield, everyone was fighting with melee weaponry and not blasters. This advantage against multiple attackers is why Kit Fisto, as notably a master of Shi-Cho, was able to nearly defeat General Grievous during their engagement. He was able to counter all of the arms of Grievous and almost easily sever his hands and throw him down. Unfortunately, this strength is also its greatest weakness. Shi-Cho is notoriously frustrating to use against a single opponent. This is why Form 2 Makashi was invented in the wake of the First Great Schism, and why Makashi is the direct counter to Shi-Cho. Despite this, Dooku did make a sort of backhanded compliment to Form 1, which of course is rare, stating this: deliberate as a lumber droid, moving step by step, cutting off the angles, clumsy, but relentlessly dogged. Dogged, of course, meaning tenacious and ruthlessly persistent, which is what leads us into talking about why it was so deadly. A master of Shi-Cho is a very deadly and dangerous person to fight. Due to the simplistic motions of the blade, it makes it easier to chain attacks and move swiftly from one strike to a completely different one. In the hands of a learner, Form 1 is basic and clumsy, but in the hands of an expert, it is wild and raw. It has been described as like watching water flow over the falls. An absolute avalanche of attacks can come from several angles and just destroy any opponents nearby. The randomization of these strikes makes Shi-Cho unpredictable and very difficult to fight against. This erratic nature of the blade work can also have some undesirable side effects for a Jedi. Getting into the motions, Form 1 can entice Force wielders to give into their emotion and attack with savage fury. Despite the intention for Shi-Cho to be disarmament, there exists a certain pull towards going in for the kill when one is swept up in the storm of its sequences. Kit Fisto and Obi-Wan Kenobi once discussed the dangers of the form. I should have gone closer to the edge, released myself into the Force, become more unpredictable, more random, says Kit Fisto to Obi-Wan, who replies, that would have been risky, not to your body perhaps, but to your spirit. And Fisto finishes with, this is the way of Form 1. While we don't have any examples of Shicho practitioners turning to the dark side like that of Vapad, I still find it interesting that such a danger exists in the context of the learner's form, and the first form of lightsaber combat ever created. Many Jedi Padawans, when they finish their basic training, are more likely to switch to a different form to get a taste for something fresh and new. Very few Jedi commit to the mastery of Form 1, but those that do find excellent control in their combat engagements. I believe this may be the secret as to why Form 1 is yet to claim anyone to the dark side. Each strike and motion of Shicho is deliberate and purposeful. These accidents are pretty rare when utilizing this form since it places emphasis on control. After all, this is what they teach children on. I feel that even if a Jedi were to bring themselves closer to the edge whilst using this style, they would still be able to pull themselves back from simply breaking off the sequence and pulling back, being able to stop the potential turn. It's fascinating that the first lightsaber form is also one of the most deadly, and that if a practitioner dedicates themselves and sticks with it, letting themselves be turned up into the fight, they can become one of the most aggressive and deadly lightsaber forms ever created, perhaps the tenacity even rivaling Form 7. I like to think of the ultimate form of Shicho like this. Exar Kun was a practitioner of Form 6 Nyman. Nyman was the form that a Jedi consular typically adopted when they did not have much focus at all on combat, and only decided to use their lightsaber as a very last resort against their enemies. However, what Exar Kun did was brought this to its ultimate version, using the jack-of-all-trades nature of Nyman to allow himself to prepare for any situation. It is safe to say that this took Exar Kun far longer to master Nyman than normal masters of other forms, and the exact same can be said for Shicho. Although it is very rare, and to our current knowledge, only Kit Fisto has brought Form 1 to its ultimate version. When in its ultimate form, it is extremely deadly to come against in combat, and the master of said form is extremely proficient and powerful in his own right, not to mention dedicated. But anyway, my fellow warriors of the light and dark, what do you think of Form 1 in our analysis? Do you believe that it is as underappreciated as we do? Or do you sit on the opposite end, and do you think that it has been rightly set aside in favor of the other 6 forms of lightsaber combat? Let us know your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and I hope to see you soon.